So I listened to Landslide by Fleetwood Mac earlier today. Still holds up. Because a landslide brought you down. With just more than 100 days left before the 2020 election, there are an increasing number of red flags that suggest Republicans are headed toward a disastrous result at the ballot box this fall. Like a cataclysm that might not just cost the party the White House and the Senate, but could set the GOP back for years to come. A once-in-a-generation sort of bad election. So consider this perfect storm of factors that appear to be building in advance of November. Factor number one, President Trump's rating on his handling of the coronavirus pandemic continues to collapse and collapse badly. In a July Washington Post ABC News poll, just 38% of people approved of how Trump has dealt with the virus, while 60% disapproved. Now compare those numbers to March, when 51% approved of how Trump was handling the pandemic, while just 45% disapproved in that same Washington Post ABC poll. Now, as the public has soured on Trump's ability to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, it has also moved heavily in Joe Biden's favor in hypothetical general election polling. Of the major national polls released in just 1 week in mid-July, Trump trailed the former vice president by 15, 11, 15, and 8 points. Not good. Factor number two, Democrats have a double-digit lead in party identification. Okay, so in Gallup polling in July, 50% of Americans identified as Democrats or Democratic leaners, while 39% described themselves as Republicans or Republican leaners. It's an 11-point gap. Math. Now that is a major shift from January, when Republicans had a 47% to 45% edge on party ID in that same Gallup polling. It's also a rapid acceleration of Democrats' advantage since even May, when the party had a 3-point edge on the party ID question. Now, as Gallup noted of this recent and big movement, quote, "The greatest movement occurred in June, likely because of increased attention to racial injustice that followed the death of George Floyd while in police custody on May 25th, as well as increased U.S. struggles to contain the coronavirus spread," end quote. Okay, factor number three, Democrats are absolutely crushing Republicans in fundraising. So the Democratic candidates in the 11 most competitive Senate contests in the country raised a collective $67.3 million in between April 1 and June 30th. That's $20.5 million more than their Republican counterparts in those races. Those are tabulations made by the Wall Street Journal. And the story is very much the same in the House, where Democratic House candidates raised $457 million in the second quarter of 2020, compared to $365 million for Republican candidates. And as the Center for Responsive Politics, which did these calculations, notes, quote, "In 13 races holding primaries in June and July that are considered competitive by the Cook Political Report, incumbent Democrats have 9 times more money in the bank, $40 million to $4.5 million, than the best funded Republican challengers," end quote. Now, any one of those developments would be a cause for concern for Republican candidates and party strategists. When all three happen at once, look out. And professional political handicappers are starting to take notice of what's building out there in the country. In mid-July, the Cook Political Report, one of the top campaign tip sheets in the country, moved 20, that's 20 House races, all in favor of Democrats, an unprecedented shift to one party. And House editor David Wasserman wrote this, explaining the changes, quote, "President Trump's abysmal polling since the pandemic began is seriously jeopardizing down-ballot GOP fortunes. Republicans began the cycle hoping to pick up 18 seats to win the majority back. Now, they're just trying to avoid a repeat of 2008, when they not only lost the presidency, but got swamped by Democrats' money and lost even more House seats after losing 30 House seats and control 2 years earlier. For the first time this cycle, Democrats have at least as good a chance at gaining House seats as Republicans on a net basis," end quote. Big deal. Now, the situation in the Senate is just as dire. Nathan Gonzalez, founder of the tip sheet Inside Elections, wrote this recently of the state of play in the Senate, quote, "The Senate has been in play for at least 9 months, but Democratic chances of winning control of the chamber have improved significantly in the last few weeks," adding, "Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats for a majority, but can control the Senate by gaining 3 seats and winning the White House. With less than 4 months to go before Election Day, the most likely outcome is a Democratic net gain of 3 to 5 Senate seats. Since Biden has a clear advantage in the presidential race, that means that Democrats are more likely than not to win control of the Senate," end quote. Really, really big deal there. Now, on the presidential level, Donald Trump is at the lowest point of his admittedly relatively short political career. The Cook report gives Biden 279 electoral votes in the solid, likely, or leaning Democratic categories, more than enough to win, and they give 188 in those categories to Trump. In July, the University of Virginia's Crystal Ball moved 7 traditional Republican strongholds, that's Alaska, Indiana, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, South Carolina, and Utah, from safe Republican states to likely Republican states and into the slate of potentially competitive contests in the Trump-Biden battle. As UVA's Cal Kondik wrote of those changes, quote, Trump is extremely unlikely to win if the polls continue to look the way they do now. And if these numbers represent a new normal, we need to account for the possibility that this election won't be particularly close and that new states may come into play. In other words, if the national picture remains bleak for Trump, then the slippage he's seen from earlier this year wouldn't just be limited to a handful of swing states. End quote. Contemplate that for a minute. In short, all the signs are there that this could be a landslide up and down the ballot for Democrats, like a historically bad election for not just Donald Trump, but for the party he took over in 2016. Yes, of course, things could change between now and November 3rd. But given Trump's obstinacy in refusing to admit his errors in dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, the current spikes in some of the most populous states in the country dealing with COVID-19, and Trump's ongoing tone deafness regarding racism and its effects in America, such a turnaround to me seems very unlikely. And that is the point. We make new point episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. Check them all out.